Sorry,
we're all set to go, are we? Thank you. Is this, just checking this is open? All right, thank you.
Benny, apologies I didn't make it to the table last week, but got started early this week, which is great. First cab off the rank. The presentation really is quite general in nature, I guess. It was really just to provide an update as to where we're at across our group, more specifically in the area of in the regulatory space and around consulting. We did have a task with council to provide So we did have the task to come back to council and just reviewing the changes that were made with the long-term plan at the time, particularly around fees and charges and public-private split. The other purpose of today is really just to give you a bit of insight into the road travelled thus far and I guess what the future looks like from a housing and development consenting space. Much of the I guess going backwards a bit to the original intent and the intent that I sort of brought in today's discussion, I guess will be a little bit maybe off-piste at times around what we're required to measure and what we're actually targeting to achieve in our own space. Sometimes the alignment of what we're asked to do doesn't necessarily always fit with what I think is potentially our best outcomes for our community. My background primarily is in supply chain management, so this stuff comes sort of, it's quite high up my agenda in terms of trying to align our demand and our ability to serve. So much of the internal focus historically is around compliance and risk, and much of the external focus that we're trying to deliver to is around time and value. I've said that many times. Our primary aim is to try and align these two parallel streams. They do run parallel. Trying to merge them and combine them and be better together is really what our motto is generally. We can't fix the system for the country with some of the things that we're given to attempt to fix it within the current state, in my view. It has to be around accountability end to end with us and our customers. So we could be perfect, which we're not yet, but equally we require our customers to contribute as well if we're going to get an overall better outcome. From a customer perspective, again, I think the customer views, that blue line there really views council as one entity. So when they ring up about a building issue and we stumble them and they have a planning question we can't answer, they sort of say, well, you're council, why can't you answer that? Aren't you in the same building? It's a good question, and they're right. A lot of focus historically has been in these three areas. It's been quite separate. So the building spaces I've talked to before comes under MB. Development engineering's with the Infrastructure Commission, and planning sits with the Environment Ministry for Environment. So you've got three different entities or three different sorts of acts and different things going on there that separate by nature our operations and how we deliver these services. If you are a layman / customer like I was when I built some time ago, you struggle to understand why this is not why it's not all connected, because the real journey is if you're going to take a bit of land and subdivide it, and then you're going to look to provide services and connect services and then build, you basically need those three things on the board. There's different grey circles around those because the building space around process is quite well developed, but not there entirely in my view. Planning less so. You're back more into manual process around spreadsheets and Word documents, and development engineering is probably another step behind as well in our context. When you look at those three things, and I guess the view we're driving towards it's been from day one, is around one system. So on the left there in the orange, with the customer at the centre, is we're pretty focused on collecting data, well, enabling data, collecting data, and using that to try and inform a better outcome. The end-to-end piece there is through planning, development, engineering, and building. When you look at each of those things individually, like I say, they're all built separately. When you look at all of them, they've got an application process, they've got inspections, they've got site visits, they've got processing, they've got invoicing, they've got all of the above, all the same stuff sits there. So we're sort of charging down a path, I guess, of one frame to fit all of those activities in and really provide one face to the customer. From a building performance perspective, we came off a bit of a low last year. And these actual numbers around the statutory days we have to report against. This is probably one measure that people will hear me talk that I'm not a massive fan of, but we're required to do it. So I put my head down and we do it. And that's been going pretty well the last sort of number of months now. We've been consistently above the line and hitting 100 at times. Key part of this, which we'll talk to shortly, is a lot of this is driven around demand. We've added in calendar days because I think that's a true measure for the customer. When you drop your consent off at council, when you pick it up from council, that's your true experience. Whether we had it for 20 days and your agent had it for 40 days and your experience is 60 days, that's not a great outcome. And generally, historically, council's been carrying that can around that level of performance. So if we take 20 days, customers, agents take 40 days, and their consent takes 60 days, and generally it's bloody council. So that's what we're working against. IAS accreditation is a process we have to do from a formal perspective to ensure that we're ticking all the boxes in the building space. We passed that low risk nicely this year. Again, and I'd get in trouble for saying, but it's not a process that's heavily focused on the customer. It's really looking at your process and not necessarily your customer outcomes. Planning on the improve as well. Trickier space, same measure around 20 days. There's a few different scenarios in there and how things are handled, and so it's a bit more of a moving feast. And with resource consents, people can apply for them, and we can't necessarily knock them on the head, so they can sit there forever, pretty much. Not easy to withdraw. So that's getting up there. We have been above the line a couple of times this year, and we continue to push on. This number can be a bit variable, particularly in calendar days, because if there has been a consent sitting there for a long time, then it can distort the numbers.
Blaine, can I ask a question?
Sorry.
Because I know one of the drivers around all of this is like better data, better insights. And so with the numbers around this, it kind of goes hand in hand with the requests for information and whether they are dropping or how they're being managed or sequenced. And so rounds of requests. Have you got any data on whether, like, how that's working in practice, like the request for information, and whether we're really front-ending a whole lot of the questions we should be asking there, and we're not using the request for information as a way, either actually or in a perceived way, to buy time?
Short answer is no. There's no intent or otherwise direction on our side to do that, and if anyone is doing that, then they'll be taking a task from my perspective. But RFIs in terms of response times are something we've strongly focused on to get to that space there in terms of our performance. Back to my point around the differences in the system. In the resource consenting system, you get one round of RFIs, and in the building consent system, you can get multiple. So my preference, I guess, is when you build to a system, is maybe we just move to one set rather than multiple, because people, depending on the process, can look at foundations and then look at framing and then look at, which could be perceived as being trying to extend the process, but that's not the case. We do have some, it's generally done in sequence, ideally all done at the same time. And my view, I guess, is if there's a question about an RFI that's raised, that needs to be addressed, then do it, but it's not our modus operandi to create more to extend out the process. So, again, that's certainly something that's not designed into the system. It's not the norm of the system. It's not necessarily how others would operate, but certainly that's one of our drivers is to get in that path. Because, at the end of the day, bring it in, assess it, send it out. If people respond to those RFIs, we can respond back, but let's not create more and stand by what we said. One of the big things in here is because there's so many different people in the process with different levels of capability, then you enter in this human factor, which is it brings about a lack of consistency, and that's something we consistently hear. And that's largely because these acts are extensive and exhaustive. And on no given Sunday do I think that we pick up everything that should be picked up when we do an assessment, building or planning, because it's so the acts are quite vast in their reach. It does come down to a risk view, and we are that's a space we're looking into as well.
Because the thing about RFIs as well is that the quicker the customer responds, the faster that they get their consent. But it also has the effect of bringing those stats down, right? So there's only so much of that calendar period that council is responsible for. There's two parties involved, customer and council, in terms of bringing these numbers down.
Yeah, and another good point, Sam. We certainly have gone out proactively with our own set of no holds barred visibility around our performance. So we do go to the market every month with our performance in these spaces, and we have included probably maybe a little bit controversially our days plus the customer days on an average for the month. So that report that goes out has both of those. So it'll show you how each party is performing. Like I say, for us to be best that we can be as a country, we have to be better together. Like you're not going to do it just one. If I'm at 2 days and you're the agent at 100 days, then it's still a rubbish process. So that's why accountability throughout this thing is critical. I think councils historically have only ever been held accountable internally, and like I said before, measures I don't think are sensible or rational. We can process a garage in 2 days, but we can't process a countdown supermarket with 3 stories of parking in 2 days. 20 days, we need 40 or 60. So there's a lack of logic in some of these measures, which is what we're sort of building in the background.
Has led with the team, we can, you can see at a consent but also a customer level, how many of those days were the RFIs sitting with our team versus how many days were those RFIs sitting with the agents. Because, I just want to emphasise the point that it's really easy to be grumpy about the amount of RFIs. Those RFIs can be resolved with really quick answers, but it's when they're not answered quickly, that's where the time delay comes.
And I guess that
just for the other, I was just going to touch on Monique said actually. So, as a customer, it's very easy, obviously, to turn those RFIs around. But when you see that intermediate, third party, whether it's an agent or person facilitating that in the middle, if they're overworked, then they might take a week to respond to a whole lot, which obviously then sometimes from what I've observed, the customers then jumping up and down with council, and I don't think that's very fair, as has been experienced in a couple of instances I've been involved with.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and I think I've sort of argued since my time being in council, it's not that long, but that councils haven't been able to defend themselves, and partially because we don't have full visibility of who's accountable in this process. That's one thing. I'll talk about systems, but one of the things that we talk about end to end is actually building that accountability in to the system so we can have full visibility and hold everybody to account. Is critical in us being better as a country. That's both good points raised. From a financial perspective, again, so this goes to some of the detail, and today's going to be a bit in a bit of detail. But I think when I sort of first got here, we had some scenarios, I guess, where came off the peak of a lot of work, and because we charged for work ahead of time, if we charged out a whole bunch of work in July, for example, in building, then the actual work wouldn't be done until next financial year. So if we took the lollies this year and we did the work next year, then we're looking pretty ugly from a performance perspective at the financial level. So we had a bit of that. Some of that sits around accruals, some of that sits around how we run the business, and some of that sits around fees and charges and the like. So as you're aware, last LTP we changed some of those dials around fees and charges, brought it back more to other peer council type levels, and made some other sort of public-private adjustments. Internally, we've started up a number of different accruals and the like to actually truly reflect what is going on, and we'll carry some of those over the financial year end to make sure that we've got the funds to do the work that were originally intended to do the work for next year. So again, pretty good turnaround, I think. No really wild adverse reaction that I know in the market or otherwise. I haven't heard anything, and it's quite pleasing not to have Monique flagging this with me constantly now. So happy places. In saying that, though, there's a whole bunch more work to do, which I'll show you in following slides. But again, I guess in our 3 key metrics that we're required to report against, we're back in the game. Some could say, well, it's a function of demand. It is absolutely a function of demand, but our demand profile's been pretty flat in real terms.
Sorry, just going back to that. Does that mean we set our fees too high?
No, and that's a natural question, and I'll talk to that as we go through.
Understanding, well, because we've seen a decrease in numbers, haven't we? Of consents.
Decrease off the peak.
Right.
That came off, but actually not relative to the market. So if you look at New Zealand Inc., the country's down about 7% and we're up 2%. So you could say we're sort of circa 9% ahead of the market. Arguably, you could debate that too if you dive into the data. But we are actually looking pretty good relative. And actually, that question, Bernie, is directly aligned to sort of my next points, really. So demand is critical. And a lot of this presentation today will focus into that space and around our finance position, because it's really important that we understand this stuff. Otherwise, we can tend to make unintended decisions, I guess. So demand's been pretty static. Monique says also, what have we delivered? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes in behind us. Don't expect you to read that. There's a whole bunch of things like our sort of proactive mail out to the market to tell them how we're doing. We kicked off a project out here to sort of look at really sort of an agile way to get into stuff and pump some resource into our space to turn the bus around. So there's a whole bunch of things in there that contribute. I won't go through any of those line to line. Like I said earlier, probably my background in supply chain, and what I've heard in my time in council is, a lot of it's about visibility. Some of the single biggest gains that people have made is around in building systems around providing visibility. Demand is critical. That's one thing we do know because it keeps coming at us. So that's not an unknown. Tomorrow's demand is unknown, but actually what it is currently today is known. Supply and capacity is largely unknown in councils, I would argue. Effectiveness, I think, is also largely unknown. And accountability, we've talked to a lot already, is that's also largely invisible. So those are our 5 things that we're really driving towards in our forward direction. Part of that is around the task that's been underway for some time has contributed to some of this outcome, but I call it sort of activity-based job costing. And the why in there is really around getting a true understanding of our costs as they apply to the tasks that we deliver to the market. And like I said earlier, a garage will have a low-level, low-cost resource and a low amount of time to deliver. a large commercial building will have a high cost resource in a large amount of time to deliver. And really, what's critical for us, if you're working in a commercial context, which I come from, is how are we going at the margin. So to date, and I think across, I came from Palmerston North City Council, and I can probably speak for a number of councils. There's not many that I'm aware of that actually have a clear view as to how they're performing at the margin on a daily basis, or on a consent basis, or on a consent type basis. That's one of our key drivers, is to get to there, because then we can be sure that we're not overcooking our customer from a cost perspective, and we can be sure that we're returning revenue to cover our costs, because all of that is demand and mix driven. So our mix of business is another key factor. If we got all garages versus all commercial buildings, that's quite a substantive change in our financial outcome. I guess, and I've spoken to Monique a few times about this, and this is my little delusion in the back of my mind, but I guess part of my driver is around sort of delivering us from a monopoly to a contestable business. And I think you'll see in the market, just recently I've got another slide pending where there's actually like a private BCA starting up. And so I worked for Powerco at a time when they came out of being owned by government and went into being contestable, and the people that were able to survive in that space were the ones who knew what they're doing from a job costing and delivery perspective. They knew their numbers and they knew the tasks, and everybody was selling copper down the scrappy and storing inventory in black stores and stuff, so they went by the buy. So really, I guess in the background, our driver is really how do we get to a space where we can be contestable in the market, so when those all-comers come, we actually can stay and retain value for the council and actually potentially make money to add back to our ratepayers. So in there is obviously the actions that identify all the activities involved in producing our services and assign costs to those, and then understand how we perform the margin. Sounds really easy, but up until recently we weren't even capturing time for our people. And if we don't know how much time is going to a two-lot subdivision, then how do you know how much cost has been attributed to it? And if that resource is a highly technical one that we pay more for because they've got highly technical skills, are we recovering that extra cost around their skill set and capability? So the aim is to better understand effectiveness and efficiency of our resources. You'll hear central government talk about there's rumour and talk around BCAs and what they may look like in the future. There's some out there who say put all the processing in a building in Palmerston North or something, and that'll be great and that'll fix everything if everyone's all sitting in the same room. That's not the answer, in my view. We're in a space now and in a time where, I firmly believe we can create virtual BCAs. We're currently using Central Hawke's Bay to do work for us. They have no work. We have work. If I can see that around the country and we can employ more of that, the upside for that arrangement is that they don't have to let people go because they've got no work, only to find that next week they've got a whole heap and they've got no people. So that's pulling the wrong lever. So we can retain their people. We can service our people and our customers at a lower cost because they're not consultants, they're our peers. They get enough to cover their bases and keep their people. We get a better rate to service our customer base. And all in all, we're just balancing the demand without having to go to market to try and source new people who aren't there, or actually to sack people because our numbers look a bit rubbish today. Because tomorrow that'll be a different story, you can guarantee that.
So what sort of percentage of work are they doing for us?
Not a whole lot. They do like a day a week, essentially, and primarily in the commercial space. This is my little drawing, which might be hard to follow, but I've been trying to, I guess, tell the story internally to my people and to the wider organisation as to how what this looks like in absolute terms, and it's to answer your question, Bernie. We set the business up long-term plan at that middle point there around break even, and it's around 20 days, and so we're going to deliver on our 20 days that we're required to or below, and we're going to break even because we can't be seen to making a whole heap of money or losing a whole heap of money. So we set up in that nice little sweet spot, which is great. Assuming you know that all your resources are fully engaged and fully employed, and that you're kicking it out of the park. What happens though when demand declines, which I think is was part of your question as well, is generally what happens at a very high level is that our ability to deliver goes up. So we're going to hit 20 days every time because we've got resource floating around per se. But the cost goes up as well because we don't have the revenue coming in. So then we look a bit rubbish, like Central Hawke's Bay, where you've got this cost, no revenue. Days are great because there's resource floating around. And the natural thing is that you start to pull some of these levers. One is to cut the resource because it looks a bit ugly. One is we could start in the future just to acknowledge the baseline and realise that this is part of our reality, is that demand will fluctuate and we have to ride it. We can invest in the process. So at that time, what we're doing a bit now is we're investing in our people and trying to grow our capability. Yes. Sorry. Sorry, Sam. Conversely, when demand increases, we go the other way, where we, and you'll know the story, where our days go out. So we start to not be able to deliver to the 20 days because we've got demand that exceeds our ability to deliver. Our profitability looks good because we've got a lot of revenue, but not a lot of output, and our costs are low because we haven't got the resource to cover. And what we do at these points is we generally go and get external contractors, professional services, and they at the margin are far fewer margin dollars come back to our business when we have to take that action, and we take that action to keep the days in line for our customer base. But it's a lot harder to recover that position because we might have a charge out fee of $200 to the market, and the professional service provider that's helping us keep our days in check is costing us $190. So there's no room for our overheads, there's no room for anything. So arguably we're probably losing through engaging in that activity. So that can lead to adverse levers as well. So we engage externals, very hard to recover. So we don't actually we've got a whole bunch more demand. So we, our margin declines when we've got huge demand because our cost to serve goes up through that. And then, obviously we can refuse to react, but then our days will go out in those periods, and then we'll get customers in the door telling us we're not performing. Sam, did you have
Yeah, sorry to harp on about this because I've raised this before, but this whole idea of having two levels of service, one like a standard level of service and an expedited level of service where people are essentially paying a premium for speed and certainty, and the idea that the premium service essentially subsidizes or allows for that fluctuation in demand. So that someone's paying a whole lot of money, expedited services certainly, and then it allows us to have that unutilized labour when the demand dips, and so they're essentially paying for having a premium service 20 or every 365 days of the year, even if it might not be utilised the whole time. Is anyone doing anything like that around New Zealand? Do we not like?
Not that I'm aware of, and it probably has we could talk about it separately, but it would have there would be some traps and catches around that, and that's I guess my personal view is that my aspiration is that we deliver to everyone equally and well. I understand what you're saying and you could structure it. Maybe you say, hey, here's our standard level of performance with our people. If you want to get it done quicker, you can pay for the consultants, which will cost you more. And maybe they could deliver quicker. You could structure it around something like that?
It's kind of like the model. And the best analogy I can think of is like when you go to Movie World, at the theme park, where people pay their ticket and then queue up for hours at different rides, but then other people who want to spend the $200 to get the queue jumper, they're essentially subsidising the cost, keeping the cost lower for the other people because they're willing to pay a higher amount to save time. And so people, you're still providing a consistent level of service that people can ultimately choose. Do they want to pay for the premium service, or do they want to reap the benefits of a lower price that's being subsidised by? Anyway, that's.
No, it's a good point, and certainly worth looking at in time. I think where we're at the moment, probably trying to get more visibility and data around what we're doing and how that would look and how that would contribute. We're probably not quite there yet, but you're right. Yeah, if you could illustrate that it's going to deliver X additional dollars through that channel, then we could bring that into our balance, obviously, in terms of how we provide that overall service. So in there, demand and complexity are two unknowns. So demand and complexity changes every day. So, we could literally go from it all being commercial work today to all being residential work tomorrow. It doesn't. It's not that linear. But as that shifts, it's a difference between we're going to Cessna pilot and a A320 pilot and a A380 pilot out there. You really don't want your A380 pilot flying the Cessna if you can help it. But that's sort of the space we find ourselves in at times. So it's how do we make sure we're aligning our competencies to our demand, and then making sure we're covering our demand sensibly. This is really busy because this is my bigger picture model, I guess, around I call demand-led modelling. So my aim in this space is really to build this model by collecting that data in the red. So all that stuff in the red is pretty much stuff we don't have freely at hand. Some of the stuff in the grey we do have access to, and it's relatively well known. And the green is sort of our feature to which we can adapt. But really, the key piece is around time. It's around task. It's around aligning time to task, so we can understand what each task takes and what costs. And then what we can do is, like at budget time or otherwise, we can come and say, hey, here's our forecast for demand next year. We think it's going to shift more to the commercial side. Here's what we're going to look like. So we're actually going to tell you what we're going to look like from a performance perspective based on our demand. And when demand changes, like if it doubled tomorrow, I should be able to come in here and tell you, hey, this is the effect. We're going to, by the end of the month, we're going to bleed on the days, and we're going to be bleeding in the cash. What do you want to do, I guess? So that's the hope. And down the bottom is really, I call it sort of a margin report, but a colour report, but it's really around being able to look at each job we do from a profitability perspective. So the key takeaways, I guess, is we're driven by demand. That's uncontrollable, both in quantum and complexity. So it is. That's our real challenge. So understanding that is critical to be able to inform you as to what the best decision is to go. How do we go forward and what we look like. How much we truly understand around the numbers and the people and the time. That'll determine how effective we can be. And I'll show you an example of that further on. And it's key that we don't pull the wrong levers. I think a while back we took there's had a large surplus in council before my time, and we probably took that to book, and then we probably followed the next year with not enough revenue to cover the cost to do all that work, and then we probably swung the other way. So I guess it's really trying to make sure we don't end up in that space in the future too. So continue to collect data and manage inputs, improve our outputs. Key and ongoing. Whilst I try to sort of externally influence system design, which means software system. So there is ironically no software system, even though there's some that have been in the building space for a long, long time. There's nothing in the market currently that delivers what I think we need to deliver for our country. There's no system. There's one that's close where, ideally you'd log in and operate in the system, so you can get all the handshakes, I call them, and then we can hold the whole system to account. We include you as the customer if you're the actual owner of the building, and we can collect all that data and we can do some quite smart stuff from there. But there's nothing that captures that, because you have a processing system that sends out an email for RFIs, and then 3 will come back, and they'll go into an inbox and people won't see them, and then they'll get left, and then the system will lose days, and then the customer will blow up and will be defensive, and you go down this path. One of the biggest things we've done thus far is we ensure all our RFIs are responded to next day. That sounds really simple. They come in via multiple channels, and I literally physically have someone who manually collects those and gives them to our building officers manually. They love it because they can see daily what they have to perform to, and they do. But short of that, they've got stuff coming in through multiple front doors with a limited ability to be across that, because us as humans, we can't handle that many inputs. You're always going to miss one. Not always, but quite often.
Well, that sounds like that's an issue in itself, that there's not a single door, as you put it, or a platform in which the customer is engaging us with through. And so on the data collection, the data's one piece, but actually having the right platform for us to do the automatic data collection and optimize and make the process more efficient is one thing, but also making it easier interface from the customer. So is it something, there's always a risk with trying to build something fit for purpose or adapt an off-the-shelf product, but is that something that we could look at, and then with a view to commercialising it ourselves and selling it to other councils? Is it worth the investment and risk of trying to develop a fit for purpose solution here? That
my personal view is not from scratch in our space, but there are 2 primary vehicles alive at the moment. One's is Objective as a software company, but very focused on, I'd say, typical historical council views of building the walls higher and making it harder, and very regulatory and compliance focused. I've been seeking to influence and work in that space for probably 4 or 5 years now, to the CEO level in Australia. We had probably only a month, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, finally had a view back to me, which is a view that I've been espousing for some time. So it gives me some hope that they're building it into their system. Their CEO gets it because he's a developer, but yet we get this disconnect. The other system is a more localised one where we are also more public-private scenario, as you talked to, Sam, where Monique and I have had this discussion around looking at how do we influence and build into that space to potentially grow a vehicle for councils that can generate revenue and control or retain some input in development and view going forward. The real tricky place in here, I've said to one of those software developers, for example, to go out and ask, because they think I'm crazy. So I say, well, go and ask some councils what they think about us, this question. And so he's a developer, and he's like, yeah, cool, okay, I get it. Gets the time thing, gets the margin value thing. So he went out to 4 councils in his travels around their software system they're developing. And he said, do you have any interest in knowing how you're doing at the margin on a job level, so you can actually understand and determine how you run your business? All 4 of those councils said, we have no interest. So then I sit here as an outlier, 1 of 5 now, and then your voice gets like, people are not, you don't get heard, because everyone else is saying, oh no, we actually just, the customer just needs to be better, so let's just build the wall higher and make it a bit harder, If they're better, they will be better, but that's always been the view, and that's not, I don't think that's the right view. We have to pull the walls down and go and work with the people to be better, because it's not until that person laying the foundation is doing a good job that we can do a good job, because otherwise we're just going to be pulling them up and giving them failed inspections. So they have to be better while we be better, otherwise the system will never be better. And that's why I struggle with some of the stuff that comes out of central government, I guess. It's not directed at that, at us being better collectively. It's directed at very sort of myopic 20-day measures, which just they don't logically fit with what we're trying to deliver. So yeah, I think, Sam, that's absolutely the path we're going down, and you're jumping ahead on my slides too, which I'll talk to, which is probably this one to an extent. So this article was just in the paper the other day. So this is a Christchurch-based company. Interestingly, they're promising 10 days. I said, what days are those, calendar or regulatory? They said regulatory. We're at 14 and a half ourselves already through our process manual. That's through my people manually putting out RFIs so we can respond. Imagine if that was automated. That's a whole different world. That would be happening every day automatically without the cost. So I would take cost out and I'd put capability in through having that built into a system. So I guess my question is as I talk about sort of from monopoly to contestable, is there a desire for us to compete commercially, to create a model like you talk about, Sam, where we actually potentially can drive value for our ratepayers as a system?
I'm happy to start off the conversation and say, absolutely. I think that, like, my dream end goal is that we're using things like AI, and that we almost have like a system that has like the equivalent to zero functionality, where it's doing all the data and insights in the background. You can print a report on something, but the tool is not necessarily data itself. The tool it's a business tool to help you track, do things, do transactions, but it's also got the data and the insights. But the more we can automate as well, as I say, I'd love us to get to a position where someone's uploading, and I think it makes it easier for us to put expectations on the customer as well, is that this is the platform we're using. If you want a building consent, you have to use this system. You upload your form, AI assesses it, says, officer needs to review this, bang, 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 bang. Same with consents. I think that we should be investing in this space, and we could be, usually I like for us to be a fast follower and not try and take on the risk of this kind of thing, but this feels like one of these, a real opportunity for us to keep working at trying to find a fit for purpose solution that we can kind of have an element of control over the design and functionality of it. Unless we find out that it's going to be a multi-million-dollar exercise, then it's probably a non-starter. But if we can find a sweet spot where we're developing a tool that meets our needs, but also has the potential for us to go and say, well, look how well we're doing. Look at this tool's great, and then progressively get other councils on board. But there's got to be a return on investment for this, and I think for our market alone, surely there will be, because it's about making the whole process more efficient and optimized and easier for us, because we don't want to waste time on checking things that are compliant or meet the requirement. We want to focus on the issues or the things where we need to go away and have that engagement. And so that's where I really hope that we could use AI to kind of really sharpen up the focus. But maybe I'm in dreamland, I don't know. So.
Probably just before councillors immerse themselves in that conversation, I probably just want to caution council that at the right time we'll come to you with some advice about that, but it has to be done in the broader construct of what do we know about the future of local government, and across all of our priorities, where do you want us to dabble? Because I suppose I just don't want you to have this conversation in isolation of not understanding some of the other levers, challenges or opportunities more broadly in terms of that technology suite across council. So I'm not saying don't show an appetite, I don't want us to take this as direction to go off and start building a business case around that, because we've actually got to do some work to present to council around what we're calling the 4 dials, which are the key areas of focus that we should be focusing our energy on in the tech and IT space, and resource consenting and building consenting is one of them. But we've got to try read the tea leaves about where the government's going, because if the government are about to produce something, we don't want to spend money or time or energy on it.
So the process you just talked about in terms of the 4 dials, and that, like, when's that going to land? Like, when would council seeing that? Because that's the other thing, is like when we keep waiting for things, like, and this happens right across local government and central government, right? Like, you sense that something's coming, so you kind of pause, or you just wait to see what happens, and so you don't go ahead. So what's the kind of timeline you're thinking in terms of where council would be seeing that?
So some of those decisions have been taken at an operational level in terms of the efficiency work we're doing internally, which aligns with the direction that council's given via KPIs to the organisation. In terms of that broader technology transformation piece, I wouldn't imagine that we'd be in a position to present that until after the election. It's not something we're going to be in a position to present pre-election.
You've woken me up about these 4 dials. Obviously, you must have names for these 4 dials, or can you give us a bit of a trailer or a preview?
I can't even remember the names of them, but Nikki will. But I suppose that wasn't the point of the conversation, and that's why I just don't, like, this wasn't a conversation about technology investment. This is a conversation about housing and business development performance. If out of it, council's keen to get into more of that technology conversation, then let's bring it, but bring it in the context of everything else.
And I think the important piece in here is that we are on a journey, and part of that is starting at the bottom, which I've got a slide further on as well. Everyone jumps ahead. But we are on a journey, and part of that is just actually literally starting at the base of collecting some of this data. So I'll carry on because I'll run out of time.
That's a question. Oh,
sorry.
You know how you mentioned you're working with Central or Hawke's Bay, was it? I mean, that sounds cool. If that sort of model was to expand, how many councils could you technically share work across before it gets too complex or too hard or too much management required?
I don't think there's a number, to be honest. I mean, at the end of the day, if there was a system, I'm not going to build one, but if there was a system in existence, like a virtual ability to do this from a supply chain perspective is very real. And particularly in the likes of the planning space, if you had things like district plans loaded as code, which is probably part of Sam's point, then there could be people in Fiji processing resource consents for us. It doesn't become contingent on being in the building. So trying to get good skill sets in the building is hard. It's actually contingent on the right setup and structure. And demand. Yeah. And every district's doesn't have the same level of demand at the same time, so there's going to be an opportunity to share. So we have to, our building system's going to die a death anyway in the middle of next year. We are working with 2 parties. We are trying to influence rather than build, obviously, and I'll be back to you. Again, don't anticipate coming back to us for any money, because I think anything that we can build and create, we should be able to cover and market through our systems, through our approach to market. I'll rattle through a few other things that have come up. Wrong slide. So 3-day inspections is probably something you've heard out there. Again, probably no surprise to you. We will, in my capacity, deliver on this because we'll be required to, because we'll be asked to. I guess in my other capacity and from a supply chain perspective, very, very difficult exercise to guarantee 3-day inspections because it is, again, demand, capacity and competency related. So as soon as any of those dials shift, then you'll get thrown off the horse. So it's a very blunt instrument, and I would argue, again, it's not where we need to be. There'll be some, there's some ideas that we can pull in to try and be better and have more chance of hitting those numbers, but they're all pretty negative. Really, like I've said before, we need to be out there with our community being better to deliver better outcomes rather than sort of creating the wrong measures. a couple of issues with inspections, so not talked about. But let's say there's one residential inspection lost per day per council across the country. There's probably 50 in Auckland and half of one here. Even at our cost at $200 an hour, that if there's one inspection lost because the builder's not ready or they forgot, which happens all the time, and if we could understand that, like your dentist does when he sends you an app text to say to store your appointment, like if we just had that little tool, and again we don't want to do a whole bunch of add-on apps, it needs to be in a system, but if you had a tool like that that said, hey, here's what we're going to look at, are you ready? And they could respond, then I think those two things on those top 2 points would go a long way towards resolving at least a good percentage. So, if I did the rough math on that, if there's one per council per day lost, that's $7 million nationally. So there's the cost and there's the opportunity cost, because the opportunity cost is we don't go out there, or we can't charge because they weren't ready and they weren't there, so we lose that opportunity for another builder. So there's a cost and an opportunity cost. Inspection fails are the same. I'd hazard a guess that the country runs at about 35% fails. I've talked to this before, but you could go out to on a day like today in the rain where the timber was wet, and the builder will fail a pre-line because of moisture. And then you could go 2 days later because they'll have another crack, and they'll fail again because of moisture. For the sake of $30 moisture meter from Bunnings, we could probably avert those fails. But that's how we have to work better together with our community to try and change that. Because if we're running at 41% of our resource, let's say wasted through fails, you're not going to get to zero. But let's say we got to 20, then we're going to add back quite a bit of value to our system, to our community. So inspection optimization is a piece. Again, it's not something that people really talk about too much. Auckland run SAP and they collect a lot of data around inspections, and this is to Sam's point around data. On that table there, all the residential inspections for a residential one build. So I've got their data and I've got the way we do it. And the way we've done it historically is 45 minutes for an inspection plus travel. Whereas in Auckland, they've got start, stop data for all those across a whole bunch of inspectors, and they have a better data set. If I apply our data, if I compare the two for a residential one, really roughly, I think we're potentially consuming 29% more time and charging 11% more than Auckland. But it's in the data, and without the data, we don't have that full visibility. So this is the stuff, if you want to, improve the system from, centrally, then I can certainly help. But it's not going to be around an arbitrary measure. It's going to be around the bigger picture. The top line is what we currently do, and many councils I know do. It's called bucket fill. You see when the next inspection is, and this is where they're going to measure their 3-day inspection thing from. You get the next inspection, you put it in. Could be a fireplace. You've got your A380, pilot going out to fly your Cessna because he's the one available. Costing a fortune. You're charging not much. You're losing, but we keep doing it, as a country. Down the bottom, it's a very simple system design around the module around inspections, which again I've tried to influence into one of these models that we've been talking about, and hopefully we're there. I'll see in the next week or so. But again, that really changes the game in terms of our ability to forecast and align our resources to the right place. Quick granny flake snapshot, because that's out there too. Government says, we do 15 a year, we charge 3.5K. We're at about 14 days, as I said earlier. Government says to be another 1,300 with this initiative with no consents needed. Probably be some houses on the boundary and stuff too, which we'll have to go and sort out from a compliance perspective through another part of our business. Net, if you do the math, it's about 13 additional for Horuwhenua if you use their math. Cost to us, we stopped doing some of our services and we add some in because we're going to have to do a PIM now. So net, we save about $30,000 or lose $30,000 in terms of revenue. DC still apply, which is quite critical, because if you go and talk to the people, which I do quite often, you'll find that is the thing that will stop. And if you go and talk to some of our local builders who build yard builds, they'll be like, I've got people ready to go. What's the DC? You say 25 grand. They say that's going to kill it. So I constantly hear. So again, not trying to spark anything up, but if we really want to make it shift the dial in this space, I don't think it's about doing less. It's probably about doing differently. And I guess I've asked, and I think Sam was in the room last time when I asked some of the people, I said, do you, if you're doing yard builds, down the road like TSP is doing, would you just go with the $3,500 in 2 weeks for us to process it and have confidence that you're in the zone and within the bounds of what you're able to do? Or B, go and create your own liability warranty position for every build that leaves your yard. And I expect the cost of doing that for those people will far exceed the cost and trouble to do that will far exceed coming to us. So I guess part of the action here is that I'm sort of proposing, well, rather than be on the back foot of taking the loss, we actually get on the front foot and just offer a fixed cost time frame, which is sort of along your lines, Sam, if you're thinking, to the market to say we'll deliver this. If you're going to do a granny flat, we'll deliver this. Save you the need of taking on the risk and giving us the compliance issues down the line. But yeah, I guess if granny flats is the thing we really want to look at, then we probably collectively need to consider our settings around DCs and service connections and things like that, and if we want to reconsider those or not. So yeah, summary and direction. Teams work pretty hard to restore a positive balance, so we're in a pretty good space. And I'll show in the next slide, we've sort of moved from a bit blind to sort of manually blind with a stick. But there's more to do. High level focus remains on getting future software platform decision right. There's probably two. We have to move to one in the space. At the same time, though, like I say, I'm trying to get resource consents built in and engineering plan approvals built in as one front door. So those things come through one front door in the consenting space. Plan C is to deliver a self-funding business model that is giving time and value back to our ratepayers and supporting growth. That's my delusion. Why does it matter? Because, like I said earlier, 90% of the focus from councils goes on this regulatory piece. Those other bits around, materiality, suitability, financial, performance, in my experience, limited, or maybe, but I don't see that happening with all the discussions I've had over the last 4 or 5 years in other councils. So journey thus far, we've come from a, low maturity, significant amount of time sort of been involved, high transactional load, high risk of error, high cost, highly manual. We've sort of pseudo manually automated stuff. But the next sort of step is to continue on that path to further automation and some of these systems that are being built, the two that I talk about, will certainly incorporate AI and the stuff you talk about, saying machine learning. That stuff will become critical in us given the best outcomes. So that's our journey thus far. Still a road to travel. And this is something I've had for a while, but this is something I guess, if we continue to approach the way we do business with the end user at the core, then we end up with better outcomes for everyone. I think we can create efficient, class-leading public services, delivering for our community. There's a real challenge in shifting some of the dial and some of the thinking, because we have to hold the whole system to account, bring the people in, and be better together. That's my story. Any questions?
Good stuff. Oh, there was an outstanding presentation, Blair. Brilliant. Hey, for me, just a quick question. Just around DCs for like the smaller dwellings we've obviously sort of been exploring, I suppose, over the last sort of 12 months. Do we need to have a conversation around to what level? Because, obviously if you've got a single dwelling, a single person or elderly couple doing that opposed to a family, should it be the same, or is it sort of a blunt object at the moment as far as?
Look, personal opinion at risk of Jacinta or somebody shooting dags at me, and then Jacinta didn't create it. But look, at the end of the day, I guess DCs are contributing to our overall outcome in our financial space, so we need to. That's sort of a consideration. So we have to have that one there because you can't just not do it because you're going to go deficit. I think though, and our intent when we went to Shannon to do our little pilot was that if you've got multi-generational families living in a house and you can shift one out, the parents out the back to a low cost, as you might have seen on that table as I flick through, $350 to rent and you can cover capital costs, you already own the land. So it becomes a really good solution. But you get to that point of the DC, it's really difficult, and I'll speak in my being in the market commercial context and as a person out there, it's difficult to fully explain that cost to people when because like if your parents are living with you and you shift them out in the backyard off the same service connection, no additional demand on services, then logic would suggest there could be a different way. But like I say, a note that it's part of a bigger system, so you'd have to have quite a different discussion, I think. It's worth personal view. I think it's worth looking at because I think if we want to really be serious about the other side about my sort of portfolio around affordable housing and enabling growth and enabling people and helping some of communities like Shannon to get better outcomes, then we need to look at it. But it does mean that you can't just credit it and say there is none because that becomes a deficit somewhere else. So it's a big animal.
Like it'd be interesting to have a look at it, in that it probably would be a smaller footprint given the size of the dwelling. But I'm 100%. Like obviously you've still got those facilities, those connections that you'd expect even if you were putting on another 4-bedroom house on a section. So it's probably just that conversation to have, especially in light of Shannon, I think.
Yeah, look, it's something we'll collect. Like I say, we'll just keep collecting the view of the market. I mean, we'll aim to get best fit for our people. Really, I mean, that's what we're trying to do. And some things might have to come here to be discussed and decided. I'm not going to, won't be for me to decide.
Just, I'd echo what Paul said. Brilliant presentation. I like the way you're thinking. Of course, that doesn't necessarily make it brilliant, but just means I agree with you. Anyway, just before we go off on the DC tangent, I think it's worth pointing out that a developer can avoid DCs by doing social or community housing. So why can't we extend that to a family that wants to put another dwelling in their backyard when in essence they're doing exactly the same thing? Just a thought.
You could if that was a policy decision of council, but it's not been your policy decision to date. So yeah. I am keen for Jacinta to just clarify the rating process, and in particular probably just keen to express why we probably wouldn't bring something to council because the water entity is going to do that work, hopefully.
Sure. So just a couple of things. So we, in the development contributions policy now, if there is a small dwelling that's effectively for a 1-bedroom type size, then it already does receive a discount in terms of development contributions. One of the reasons why the bigger house, for example, still gets the same level is because sometimes it can be difficult to tell in the long term how many people are going to be in that house. So to be fair to the other properties that might subdivide and have equal and build another lot, it's just about a judgment of fairness really in terms of different types of building. And as Monique mentioned, in terms of the water side, it would make sense for the new entity to probably pick up what those development contributions might look like in the future. Just confirming as well, though, from a rating perspective, if there is a new dwelling put on a property and it's not rented, then people can apply and receive a remission for their rates on it. So there is some benefit there as well.
Thank you, Blair. And I think you deserve top spot again after that presentation. I just want to actually compliment the fact that you are continually seeking these efficiency gains and not being just satisfied with, delivering the expectation, but trying to make it better, and that you are so much more customer focused, I think, is a real plus. And I know the feedback that we get from some of our local developers is sometimes not necessarily positive. I know that a lot of the messages that I get from people from outside the district are very complimentary about the service they get through this organisation. So just want to acknowledge the great work that you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We are here today, no presentation, but we're here today to kind of discuss the process that we've been through over the last couple of years to review the Foxton Beach Endowment Fund policy. I'll be here to take any questions, but mainly we'll be handing it over to the group that have been involved in this, Deputy Mayor Allen and the Foxton Te Awaho Foxton Community Board. We do have an apologies from Hayden Tutua, who was hoping to be here as well and present alongside the group. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Ash. So look, I'll kick off with a view to giving it a bit of a background about what we have been doing, what the main sort of additions or changes or massaging of the policy involves, and then John, as chair of the board, will talk about the next steps, the things yet to happen. And then I thought it'd be really good if those people who have been involved in the process each have their piece and add in what they wish to. Those people, of course, being members of the community board, along with the two Kirikiri ward councillors, Ross being the other one, and Nina and Justin unfortunately couldn't be here today. So chance for everyone just to input as to where we've been. So look, you've had a chance to read the policy. It's not a long one, which is handy. We who have been involved in the process have a real determination that a policy be adopted by October. That, you know, having done all the work, the worst thing that could happen would be for that have to be relitigated with a new table next term. So there's a timeline and a process about getting it through. First, the workshop today, which is a public workshop. So to those members of the public interested, a first chance to sort of hear about where we're at, what our journey's been. Subsequently, a report to council. And this workshop, I guess, is an opportunity for councillors to voice any concerns or any requests for further information prior to it coming to council, where council then will hopefully adopt a draft of some sort, hopefully this one, for public consultation with the affected parties, being the residents of the beach. So I guess I want to indicate that this policy really is a new initiative. The point of difference from the previous reiterations or revisits of the policy is the engagement with hapu. And I want to use that term hapu in the meantime, but in fact there is a better term which I'll come to when we talk about who we're actually engaging with. And what's happened through that is that we have got our heads around the fact that there are two stories. When we look to the history of the endowment land, we have for many years talked about the Harbour Board land, which was gifted, I think, first to the Manawatu Council, then to the Hurawhenua District Council. And that's been the history that we've acknowledged and the history we've worked from. But in fact, there is the really important story around Papanaio J Block and the very sad history of that land and what happened to the owners of that land in the past. So as a result of that, those of us who have been involved in the process have said the policy should, in all fairness and justice, reflect the two stories, both stories. The history of what has happened to this fund since '89 amalgamation, where the community board has played a key role in recommending use of that fund to council, has been a good one in many ways, but it's been a narrow one. So the focus in the past has been very strongly on fiduciary care, on making sure we have a healthy balance sheet, on using the money from that fund for causes which would benefit the people of the beach, not only within the boundaries of the beach, but also other activities which may be outside of the boundaries of the beach, but which are deemed to have clearly benefited them. And some really big things have happened that would not have happened without that fund being used. One of the early ones was the cycleway, which connected the township to the beach, but also things like the pump track at the beach, state-of-the-art pump track, 360,000. The Te Waiora, the health centre at Foxton, the Te Awaho Newstrom, in the pool. And I would make the claim that those things would in all likelihood not have happened had it not been for the use of the funds. So some very good stuff has happened in the past. But the difference is around now this partnership, the partnership with Hapu. And using the term Hapu, what we're really talking about there is actually not so much Hapu, but the descendants of the Papanao block. Those are the people who have that direct relationship. And the policy, therefore, has become much richer and more nuanced. It's no longer about looking after the money, making sure that's good. Now, that is still there, of course, but it's about those 5 values which you would have read about in the policy. The values about the by us and for us, about heritage culture, recreation and conservation, about economic development, and about well-being and community. And you can see how that suddenly becomes a much richer sort of detailed way of looking to how we manage the fund and what we do with it. Again, I'll use the term Hapu. It was made very clear, and I acknowledge Hayden's input here. Hayden has worked very constructively with us, very openly, Hayden's way, very directly, very openly, very professionally, and has made it clear that really their prime interest is in land use. It's about the heritage and culture. It's about the relationships, the whakapapa to the whenua, to the actual land there. And he's given signals that there are areas in the beach that they really have a strong, passionate interest in, and that's really, in terms of those values, that one there about heritage and culture is very much to the fore. And I just want to finish by stating the obvious, but it does need to be stated. The board is very clear in its position, I believe, but John will jump in if I get it wrong, that they are really the advocates and the first cut people when it comes to advising council on the fund of the future. And it's worth remembering that when the existence of the board was challenged through an appeal to the representation and review process, that appeal to retain the board was upheld on the basis that the board played a key role in terms of being that community voice for the endowment land. So the board sees its role very much as being the group that does advise council, acknowledging that under the Act, under the Rolled Act, the final decision does rest with council about any use of the funds from that land. But the board stands clear in its view that it does have a strong advisory role, and again, as you'll see in the policy, it asks to formalise what has tended to happen in the past, which is on those occasions where the council does not agree with a recommendation from the board, they are asking through the policy that council have an obligation to refer the matter back to the board, acknowledging that it will not be a game of ping pong to and fro, but there will be, I'm saying that for you, Nola, there will be a reference back to the board. The board can relook at its application, but the final decision then will be taken by council. So that's the background, that's where we're at. And now I'll pass over to John, who wants, I think John's going to pick up on what the unfinished business, the next steps, if you like, and then the opportunity, I think, to go around the table for those people who've been involved.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk to this. I think it's quite an important factor. We've had some very good communication with Hapu on this situation, and I would like to emphasise the fact that the Foxton Endowment Fund, it's more than just a financial resource. It has a long history to it. It has emotional involvement to it as well, and these things are important, and this is where we need to acknowledge the involvement of Hapu, or the future involvement of Hapu in talking about it. They're not looking for control, they just don't want to lose their interest in the land and their interest in the culture of the area, and we tend to agree with that one. Okay, the things that we're quite concerned about, they're all in here. So the land associated with the Foxton Beach Endowment Fund is categorised into four broad areas, which is distinct from the way the council looks at land, right? That they are the land identified for potential development, for commercial and residential, that's fine. Areas of environmental significance, the coastal dunes area, which is fine. Areas of high heritage and cultural value, which is very important to the iwi, the hapu, and underutilized properties with potential for income generation. So the idea is that the fund should be growing, and we should be actively working on growing that fund, but taking into account the four different aspects of the area. Now, one of the very keen things which the hapu are interested in is the application and the land usage, and that's the strategy. We have not quite finalised that. We've agreed on almost everything else on the way through very amicably, but we've got to sit down and hammer out the land strategy, because we need to know exactly the areas in which they are cultural significance to them. We've come through the operational aspect of it very well with council's involvement. We've agreed to be able to sit around the table and discuss applications, but the recommendation for those applications will still come from the community board. They'll be discussed with hapu prior to the recommendation coming from the community board, and that was quite clear. The board suggested, in fact, that they had more numbers of hapu to discuss it with the board at the round table discussion, but the final presentation will come from the board to council for council's decision, and that we felt was quite important. There's a long-term objective, and that is to grow that fund for the benefit of the descendants of Foxton Beach residents and the hapu, the Papagayo block, because those are the people who need looking after as far as this is concerned. The assessment and review process has been amended slightly, which is in here. So initially, the council officers will assist with the initial administration, collate and to verify applications, to check the facts on the situation, because we firmly believe we need to get to the facts and not just opinion, right? A working group then will be set up with the Te Awaha Foxton Community Board with equal representation from hapu. We will then sit down and sort that out through collaborative workshops. We'll work together and put the final proposal together. The board will present that to council. Council will make the decision, and if they approve it, that's fine. If they don't approve it, it'll come back to us with the reasons why they don't approve it, and the areas which need further discussion or further negotiation. And everyone seems to be happy about that, and I think that's probably the best way of working it. We have a good relationship. Let's build on that relationship and make it work. Thank you.
So perhaps now, if we move around the table, the opportunity.
I just would like to very much acknowledge the introduction to this by Deputy Mayor David Allen. I thought he was very eloquent and he spoke very well, and also our Chairman John Gerling. I think that the fund has been around in operation for quite some time, and it's now being put into a context which I think is about partnerships and opportunity, partnerships between those that manage the fund and hapu, and the people that live and the ratepayers and residents of Foxton Beach, and a partnership and opportunity between the Te Awaha and Foxton Community Board and this council. And I think that it's a unique fund, and the future is looking bright, and the context in which the policy is at currently, I think, is a very good stepping stone for the future, because it takes into account various parties' interests. But this partnership arrangement and the desire to grow the fund, I think, is important, and to manage it responsibly, carefully, and for the interests of the present resident ratepayers and going forward the future. And I'm very grateful to everyone involved for the time and intellect and resources that have been presented. I think it's a very productive exercise, and I'm looking forward to us working together to ensure the fund continues in a positive fashion. Thank you.
To make sure I get the right one. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I firstly just want to hugely acknowledge Ashley's contribution and her fast turnaround, and we wouldn't have got here today without her doing some amazing work real fast. And so several gold nuggets, please, Monique, to her for her work on what she's doing. This has been truly a collaborative journey, one of learning for me as well as others, not being born local. To me, it is about growth. So we talk a lot about district growth, but this is growing so that we can continue to have a strong endowment fund going forward. And so, apart from just one little niggle that I would have preferred only to do distributions once a year, I fully support this entire document. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. As it's been well said, this has been a long journey for many years now. The policy review was first mooted many years ago, a number of years ago. It was well and truly overdue. And look at obviously the future of the fund and how the fund could be better utilised and managed in its existence in the coming years, in terms of the land, the endowment land that still sits underneath the fund, or sits in the beach area, but also investment around the fund of how, again, that fund could be sustained for a long time to come. Deputy Mayor Allen spoke about the the investments the fund has made that's made a huge difference, or created some facilities and some projects to happen in Foxton, outside of the beach community, over the years, in PANS, the medical centre, and aquatics. The fund's also, over many years, not subsidised the ratepayer, but allowed projects to happen in Foxton Beach. That it has taken some pressure off the ratepayer in terms of the fund being able to fund a lot of those projects that probably wouldn't have happened so quickly, but would have been on the work program at some stage. And the fund has paid for 50% of projects over many years, around roading and other things, and then things including the pump track and the reserves and things you see at Foxton Beach that really add so much value to that community. Obviously, there's been a development over years from the descendants of Papanoa Block, J Block, and local Hapu, in terms of their interest in not so much the fund itself, but more probably the land parcels that sit within those endowment lands, that are in some many ways have high significance to them. And I also agree with Mary Ellen that the spirit in which the conversations have been had has been exemplary. It's been excellent. And the one on Monday night, while it delved down into some pretty contestable conversations, they were in good spirit, taken in good spirit on both sides, challenging as they should be. But at the end of the day, it got some agreement around where the policy currently sits. Now it's in front of the council, and certainly looking forward to the conversations. There'll be challenge, and so there should be. I'm really interested to hear the perspectives. So that's where I sit. Thanks, guys.
Kia ora. Just wanting to thank Te Awaho Foxton Community Board, the descendants of the Papanoa J Block, for this review, for my participation in the review of the Foxton Beach Endowment Fund, Hayden Tudor and Ashley and Grayson for your contribution. I found it really interesting. History was amazing. On Monday night, I felt there was a collaboration for the community, which was amazing point to come to. So yeah, I've been through all of the paperwork and in support of where the direction that the review is heading, and just interested to hear any feedback from fellow councillors. Kia ora.
And just before we do, a quick word from Chair of the Board, John. One thing I would like to mention, I would like to thank the officers, the council officers, for the good work which they did and the help they've been to us throughout the whole operation. They've put in a lot of effort and it's really appreciated by the board and by Hapu. Thank you. Yeah, so Mayor Bernie, it's really over to the table now as to questions, feedback, whatever, I guess.
David, I think the way that it's been presented to us is, a really good, exemplary way of the collaboration and the joining together of Hapu Community Board Council. I have little to add to it. We've talked about this endowment fund for, as Councillor Brannigan says, for quite some time now. So it's really pleasing to see the work that's being done coming to fruition, and I think a really good focus for the future and setting some real good guidelines and framework to operate. The thing is, the community of Foxton Beach and Foxton and the wider Foxton community is extremely fortunate to have something like this that can add to their community, because I don't think there would be many, certainly not in this district, where there has been funds created money has been expended very quickly, but with this has been governed by statute, it's been governed by good governance, and long may into the future it continue to contribute to the well-being of Foxton and the wider Foxton area, including the beach. And I think that already the difference that it's made, as you said, to a number of projects that have been invested wisely, I believe, in terms of the future of Foxton, is really pleasing to see. But again, just acknowledge the work that you've all done in getting to this point, and look forward to it continuing. Cheers.
Open to the table now, I think. Yeah, Sam.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I guess initial reaction is, and please take this as constructive challenge, is it feels like the outcome of the review went beyond the mandate of the review, because it's now incorporated, I guess, ideas or concepts of a role and influence around utilisation of the land, land use, that kind of thing. So it's almost like a bit of the focus has become about the land holdings rather than disbursement of the funds or the fiduciary role that you do, and which is what the Roll Act contemplates, is around the prudent management of the funds, right? Not necessarily the property holdings. And so what my initial concern reading the document is that in some ways it frustrates or seeks to supersede some council decisions that have already been made around non-core properties and disposal of said properties. And so I guess this is not a question necessarily for the table, but perhaps for officers, is I'll need really clear advice around, one, what is inside the property holdings, like what is actually within the scope of the endowment holdings. So what does this policy essentially extend to? What is second? What is the impact on those earlier decisions in terms of those resolutions? What is the standing of those resolutions? Does this ultimately supersede those? Does it render them moot? Third, impact on financial strategy, because the disposal of property is a core component of our financial strategy in terms of reducing our overall debt. And I'm concerned about the impact of that on financial strategy. And I guess the fourth piece is that in some ways reviewing some of the language and intent that's captured in the document around that land use, utilisation, aspiration for that land. In some ways it constrains or caveats the use of some of that land to the extent that could have an impact on devaluing the land in terms of were it to be offered to the free market. And so what does that look like from a accounting treatment? What does it look like from a financial strategy perspective? So I think that I'd really want to understand what is the impact of this on those things. I think that I'm intrigued by the whole ambition to grow the fund, because obviously as the lease holdings come up, there is mechanism for those lease holdings to be offered to the current leasee, right? In terms of, do you want to purchase, and then the funds are released back to the fund. But other than increasing the amount of properties that are sold in order to release those funds, the only other way that the fund will grow is through commercial investment of the funds elsewhere, right? So I'm just trying to reconcile the ambition with how this is actually going to play out in practice and what. Anyway, I'll hand back over for any response.
Yeah, look, I just really good points, and the report to council will cover those. There are some, I think, a number of answers, but I don't think today is the day for that, because as you're signalling, these are things that you want comfort around, and thank you for identifying some pretty key questions. Jacinda, I don't know how much you want to answer at this stage, or.
There's maybe a couple of points that I could, in relation to the growing of the fund, when it's been talked about from a cash fund or a financial assets fund perspective. That has been from the perspective of not just using it to pay down council's debt like it has been in the past, and it earning the average cost of borrowing. The conversation at the table was more about, is there a more moderate or a slightly higher growth based investment approach that could be done so that the fund could earn a little bit more and allow it to be more sustainable in the long term, or to provide more growth in the long term to then distribute to the community. In terms of the policy and the property utilization strategy, there was very much an understanding that there does need to be an incorporation of it within the council's wider property strategy. And in terms of the property strategy that we've discussed in the past, when we have talked about those elements of the Foxton beach land, they have always been part of the endowment fund land that would need to be distributed back to that land. But they have been, when they've been talked about in terms of that property strategy, they've been talked to as part of the whole council mix, despite the fact that they have always been carved off in terms of being endowment land. When we have talked about them being available to repay debt, that has been from the perspective of, yes, they would repay the overall debt, but they are still ring-fenced for all intents and purposes in terms of that endowment asset.
I think maybe just to offer some clarity and hopefully assurance, Councillor Jennings, and it will be important for community board members and councillors who've been involved. If you have a different view, then you should express it. My understanding is that the land utilisation conversation has emerged quite recently. It is not a conversation that has been fully explored or is intended to be committed through through this policy document, what's been committed to is the work to develop a land utilisation strategy. The outcomes of that, the impacts of that, consequences or not, absolutely would need to go through robust testing with council, because if it does have, like if it undermines the property strategy or our financial strategy, then it triggers significance and it requires an amendment to the long-term plan. So our advice as officers was, signal the intent to do some work around a land utilisation strategy, but if you feel like the policy has gone too far, then we need to, as officers, come back with some advice around what that would mean, because that if it impacts our financial strategy, then it's a whole different conversation around how we navigate that with our community in terms of significance and engagement.
All I would say in response to that is I think page 7 and 8 certainly signpost. I mean, the language is essentially a beach endowment fund property utilisation strategy is essential, and then it defines the kind of scope of that already in this policy. So either it's gone too far, or yes, it's going to need some further thinking.
It might need to just be reframed to better articulate the intent around the development of a strategy, because the board and Hapu haven't even talked about the options, or what that could look like, and nor as officers we provided any advice around a land utilisation strategy.
Could I just struck some clarity in? The motivation around the land utilisation strategy is that over time there's been a lot of sale of lands within of endowment land. There's parcels of endowment land left that the whole working party view was that we need to carefully think about what those lands now mean for that community, for that wider community, in terms of the significance to some land, but also what do some other lands look like. And one example would be Darwick Street, which is under a district plan deferred commercial, and at some stage, there's obviously been the view, and I think still a lot of us hold that view, that there could be a really good commercial development on there one day. The land utilisation strategy, from a board point of view and the community point of view, what does that land look like? Should that land be best sale, or should it be something like the motor gap, where the land's retained and leased or something like that? Those sorts of conversations are what's in the view. So. And again, some of those lands have clearly got, for the whole community, not just certain aspects of parts of the community, clear heritage, culture type values that you'd want to try and sustain for the community, etc. And I could talk about which lands they are, but I won't. So that sort of gives some sort of clarity around that. The other one I wanted to touch on was the land. So while we have endowment land on our property portfolio, that's not part of our financial assumptions in terms of our land disposal, are they? Well, I'm pretty sure it's not. It shouldn't be anyway.
If it's part of land that we have proposed to sell and we don't actually have assumptions now built into our long-term plan, we used to in the previous long-term plan. So in terms of any assumption on the sale of those currently within our budget, no, there isn't.
Because on that point, that's what kind of sits a little bit uncomfortably with me, and maybe I need some further advice, is that right across the district, any land that's been deemed non-core and for disposal, once it's sold, it reduces the overall council debt and benefits the community at large, right? Whereas what we're saying is that when an endowment property is sold, the funds from that will only benefit the freeholding account fund, but doesn't defray or reduce the debt burden associated with Foxton Beach or Foxton related capital projects, so therefore only benefiting Foxton Beach through expenditure of the fund. So that's what I'm just trying to reconcile. It just doesn't, and I know we've got some legislation that's governing the disbursement of funds, but that's So why wouldn't we take a consistent approach then with disposal of property in live-in that will only benefit live-in capital projects or Tokomaru, or you know what I mean? Like, so yeah, that's.
And my understanding is we're creatures of statute. The proceeds from the sale of the land revert to the endowment fund. That is a fact. So the question about whether we extend that principle as opposed to a statute we're working under is a separate discussion.
In terms of the approach, broadly, this council has taken a harmonization approach to its funding, and I'll leave that. So, in general, and from a complexity perspective, there's definitely very good simplicity in having a level of harmonization across. There are some regional councils that have hundreds of targeted rates to administer because of the keenness to keep everything at different jam jars. So there is a choice to be made from a funding perspective, but ultimately this council in the past has taken a more harmonized approach.
And I understand your perspective, Councillor Jennings, but I think that if we were to play that argument, we could also play that argument about capital investment that the freeholding account have made into assets that council will have otherwise had to invest in. Yeah, so like we think about the pool, we think about Te Awaho Newstrom. Actually, the endowment fund helped fund those projects, which then actually meant the wider ratepayer benefited. Jacinta, could you just talk to our internal treasury management? Because I just think that it would be helpful for community board and councillors to all understand that how the freeholding account fits into our internal treasury requirements.
Sure. So as a council, we have effectively, when we go and borrow money or we repay debt, we don't have any separate pieces of debt that are associated with different activities. But when we do manage it ourselves internally, everything is specifically ring-fenced to the individual activities with which the debt is taken out for, and any funding is received from the community to repay it. So for the likes of the endowment fund, it's treated almost like its own separate activity. So it has assets, it earns income, it has expenses, which are all ring-fenced off together, and the net assets that the fund currently has then earn interest on behalf of that activity's net assets. And that's no different than any other activity across the council. So where we do talk about it repaying debt, where we have held it within the council's overall debt book to repay debt and earn some interest on, that's where in the past it has reduced the council overall debt picture, but the council's interest has been charged. We have asked for rates from the community to help fund the interest on that to be paid to that endowment fund.
Just a question, or maybe two, we'll see. Page 9, operational management. At the start of each financial year, council officers working in partnership with the Te Awaho Foxton Community Board and co-opted representatives. What does that actually mean?
Thank you for picking that up. That was meant to change to NHAPU members, so no co-opted representative.
So the idea, Mike, of a working party that would work with community board on reviewing applications in order for the community board to then make a recommendation to council, who then ultimately make the decision.
My other question is that this is appears to be obviously a crafted policy to majorly include iwi hapu. Which iwi hapu are we actually talking about? Are we talking about Raukawa and not Moapoko, or has everyone been involved, or only some?
It's thanks for that, Mike. It is really the direct descendants of Papanau block. So we've been using iwi hapu because I guess there's fewer syllables, but the accurate term is those actual descendants of Papanaia block.
Just to add to that, through this process, we have engaged with Raukawa, Rangatane and Murupoko and invited them in to participate in the process, included them in invitations to hui. Both Murupoko and Rangatane, they both let us know that they didn't intend to be involved in the process.
That's a good point, Deputy Mayor Allen, is that maybe the document does need to be specific throughout about identifying members of Papanaia J block. I think, there's probably some legal structures associated with registering those descendants if it's still a block that exists within the MyLegal, just so that there's not confusion created when people turn up and say, I represent so-and-so, I should be having a say on this board.
Noted, and we have just had a discussion around that.
So just one other question from me would be that perhaps it could be covered in the council report just around the consistency and alignment with the council's recent decision around the iwi first right of refusal, and how that also then fits with I guess the policy still provides for lease anyone the first right of refusal. That's captured in part of the lease arrangement to be
is included
honored.
In the Act.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So the Road Act still applies where those lessees apply to purchase the leasehold land. We still, as council, have to agree to that through a process, but agree to it.
So if some of that endowment fund property is sold with the iwi right of first refusal, which iwi does it get offered to?
In terms of the residential land that is sold, that is sold directly to the person who is leasing that land with their house on it. So they have first right through the Act to purchase that piece of land. If they don't purchase it, they can continue on the lease.
But of course there are then the other pieces of land, e.g. Kilmaster Block, potentially David Street,
But those pieces are not defined in the Act of having to sell to the lessee. It is the residential pieces of land.
So I'm assuming, without wanting to put words in Sam's mouth, that those are the sorts of parcels of land that he's interested in terms of how it squares with the first right of refusal policy.
So, I recall also from a property disposal discussion maybe 4 or 5 years ago that there were quite a number of properties that were coastal dune properties that don't have a current leaseholder, but I can't remember what their status was. I just think they were a bit strange. And
coastal dunes.
And so almost there's a section in here, and I'm just trying to find it, that references protection of coastal dunes areas. So again, just understanding the impact on the actual realisation are those properties that are what is the impact on those specific properties as well? Because I understood that there were some steps that council would have to take in order to make those properties with a title that could then be disposed of. I can go back through my records, but there's a section in here that just talks about protecting coastal areas. It's under Valley 3. Yeah.
Talking, Councillor Jennings, I think what's becoming clear to me is that we've probably got some work to do to better articulate in the policy the intent behind those values, because they're intended to guide decision makers around how the funding is allocated. and I yeah, and this is no criticism of the work our team has done, but I think it's probably a reflection of just the rush of trying to get this here today, is that the land utilisation stuff has not been thought through. Like, that's high level conversations, all in good faith, that have been had, but that's kind of like the project of the next Te Awaho Foxton Community Board. That's not for between now and the election. What the intent behind this work was to do was to finally get out and consult with the Foxton Beach community about a new policy which reflects a pretty long journey with Hapu to say, actually, we want the voice of, I'll reframe that, descendants of the J Block to have a voice in the process about when we allocate funding from the freeholding account, the spirit in which we're going to do that, and what becomes important in the way we allocate those funding decisions. But I think it's valid, the questions you're raising, because it tells me that we've possibly blurred the land utilisation piece, which is something we wanted to signal as a future piece of work, but maybe we've just got a little bit ahead of it, and that's at risk of actually distracting from all the policy work that the community board have been focused on. But it would just be good for community board members to confirm that that's where they see it.
As a community board member, yes, that is as I said, but I see this document as an overarching policy document with additional work that needs to be done, as has been outlined by the chief executive of the council.
Good. No, that's great and very, very, very genuinely useful challenges. So the report will pick those up, and next step is to bring it to council, because as Monique said, we've really got to get out and talk to the people, affected parties, get this nailed before October.